Welcome to the Save What You Love podcast. I'm your host, Mark Titus. My guest today is Ben Goldfarb. Ben is the author of Eager, The Surprising Secret Lives of Beavers and Why They Matter, which was published in 2018, and Crossings, How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet in 2023. Ben grew up in New York and fell in love with the natural world in the Catskills. After school, Ben worked for the National Park Service in Yellowstone, tagged sea turtles in North Carolina, and worked for the Parks Department in New York City doing urban forestry, and then turned his attention to writing. Starting with high country news in Colorado, Ben's career has gone on to include writing for The Atlantic, Science, The New York Times, The Washington Post, National Geographic, Orion Magazine, Mother Jones, The Guardian, Outside Magazine, Smithsonian, bioGraphic, Pacific Standard, Audubon Magazine, Scientific American, Vox, OnEarth, Yale Environment 360, Grantland, The Nation, Hakai Magazine, Vice News, and other publications. Eager, as a book, is one of the best titles I've ever come across in recent memory, and eager I was to learn more about beavers and their role in protecting salmon country. I hope you enjoy meeting Ben and engaging in this fascinating conversation as much as I did, and we'll see you down the trail.
How do you say what you love when the world is burning down? How do you say what you love when pushes come to shove? How do you say what you love when things are upside down? How do you say what you love when times are getting tough?
Ben Goldfarb, where are you coming to us from today?
Hey Mark, how's it going? I'm in Salida, Colorado, which is a few hours southwest of Denver on the Arkansas River. It's an awesome spot. We love it down here.
Why? Why is it so awesome? Why do you like living in Colorado?
Oh man, I mean every single outdoor activity imaginable is kind of world class out at the back door. The backpacking, the skiing, the mountain biking, the fly fishing. It's all just phenomenal and all within an easy drive's reach. So it's a sweet spot.
That's fantastic. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about Colorado down the line here, but as we tend to do on this show, it's a long format show, and that I love it. I love long format because we don't have to really worry about whether stories meander like rivers or not. And speaking of, I would love to hear your story. And it can meander and you go any way, which way you want, but I am just curious, and I know our listeners are curious, what formed you? How did you get into this work? And, what was the backstory on this passion for the work that you very clearly demonstrate in all of your writing?
Oh boy. Well, thanks for asking that generous question. Let's see. I was a kid who grew up hiking, camping, fishing, especially. Like a lot of your guests and probably listeners. Always loved being outside. Also loved writing. I wrote lots of fiction as a teenager and later in college. After college, I had kind of a series of field ecology tech type of jobs. I worked for the National Park Service in Yellowstone doing fisheries work. I tagged sea turtles in North Carolina. I worked for the New York City Parks Department doing urban forestry research. And so, I just loved being outside. I kind of imagined myself going down this ecology track or becoming a professional conservationist for an NGO in some capacity. But the whole time I was doing that work, I was also writing about it, keeping blogs and writing articles for, various publications. And over time, I just came to love the writing, almost more than the work itself, or at least, I saw more of a future for myself in that. I think, like once the science gets harder than counting, I'm kind of out at that point. I can write a sentence, but I can't do advanced statistics, so I just was trying to understand myself and recognize that, ultimately writing about nature was sort of the perfect way to combine my passion for conservation and wildlife with, whatever aptitude I had as a writer. And that eventually became the gig.
Word. Well, I'm curious at what point did this idea come into your head that you could write? And, did you have a mentor? Did you have a particular favorite book? Did you have something that just sort of kickstarted that idea about, oh my God, this might be something that I could do and I would love to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see, in college, I remember reading, David Quammen for the first time, encountering books like Song of the Dodo, especially that book, which was just, hugely influential for me, and really, I think changed my conception of what a book could do. Here's this epic tale of island biogeography. For those who haven't read it, it's a book about basically how speciation happens, where biodiversity comes from, and also why we lose it, why extinction happens. Using Darwin and Wallace and E.O. Wilson, all of these legendary figures in scientific history as kind of the prisms to tell those sorts of stories. And so, and that book is just incredibly globe-trotting in scope. Quammen goes everywhere and talks to everybody, and it's like 600 pages long. I don't think it could ever be published today. But it just was this this mind-blowing book that I read in a conservation biology seminar, and I think just changed my conception of what environmental writing could do, and was something that I wanted to emulate and will never successfully emulate, but it's at least a book to aspire to.
Amazing. I know for me, getting into storytelling, it was kind of a scary thing. My folks, when they found out that I was studying acting in college, both of them passed out out of fear and or just general malaise. But what point did you decide you were going to make a go at it, writing? And I mean, were you working a full-time gig? Did you kind of ease into it, or did you make a decision like, you know what, damn it, I got a good idea here and I'm going for it?
I ended up getting an internship at a magazine called High Country News, which is based out in Colorado, and they cover environmental issues throughout the American West. Amazing publication with a really loyal and dedicated readership. And that was my first time in a newsroom. I had this kind of ecology background. I'd spent plenty of time in the field. I felt like I knew the issues well, but I didn't really know what it meant to be a journalist. How do editors decide what stories to commission and what pitches to accept, and what does fact checking look like? How do you go about interviewing sources? I mean, all of the fundamentals of journalism. I'd really done almost none of that, and so it was that 6-month period in the High Country News newsroom in a little tiny town called Paonia, Colorado, out on the western slope. I mean, that was just totally formative to me. That was sort of what taught me to be a professional, and also showed me, I think, that this really was the right track for me. So after that internship, that turned into a staff writing position that that allowed me to kind of earn a monthly paycheck, while also giving me plenty of time to start pitching other magazines and building up my my Rolodex of editorial contacts and figuring out what sorts of stories I wanted to write. It was a High Country News story about beaver restoration that ultimately turned into Eager, my book about beavers. So yeah, it was really that it was that opportunity back in, what was that, 2012, 2013, something like that that got me going.
You still have friends and contacts there?
Yeah, definitely. I still write for those guys all the time, and I'm an undying fan of that magazine. I mean, they just fill such a cool niche. They just cover natural resource issues in the West so much deeper and smarter, and with so much sort of more institutional memory than any other publication. They're just they just fill this incredible, otherwise unoccupied niche. So any HCN writers or subscribers out there listening to this podcast, man, shout out you guys.
Yeah, word. It's obviously a paragon, here in the West, and it's what a place to start your formative career. Let's get into it. Your current book is Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet. I was struck by this little factoid that you point out. 1 million animals are killed by cars each day.
Yeah,
in the U.S.
right?
alone.
Yeah.
I was thinking a month or a year, like a day in the U.S. alone. Just that. But even more, you say the harms of highways extend far beyond roadkill. Let's dig into that. Tell us about the book, why you got into it, and what you mean by these harms beyond roadkill.
Yeah, that's an awesome set of questions. So crossings, right? This book is about road ecology, and road ecology is basically this relatively small, but I would say very fast growing field of science that looks at all of the ways in which roads and really all of our transportation infrastructure kind of intersect with and impact nature, right? And roadkill, as you allude to, is sort of the most obvious impact, right? We've all seen the dead deer or raccoon or squirrel or elk or what have you by the side of the highway, and certainly that's really tragic. And I think that the number of animals killed, as as you say, is kind of unfathomably large and vast, and it's this huge conservation crisis for all kinds of threatened and endangered species. Grizzly bear 399 was just killed on a highway a couple weeks ago. Incredibly sad, right? The most famous bear in the world. So it's it's this huge conservation problem. But roadkill is really only the tip of the iceberg, right? And so road ecology looks at all of these other connections as well. The impacts of road noise pollution, on animals, right? The fact that the constant roar of engines and tires is having huge sublethal impacts on animals, raising their stress levels and diminishing their reproductive success and driving them away from places they'd otherwise want to live. As a fish guy, you're probably familiar with the whole road salt issue, right? We're adding, many millions of tons of salt to our highways as a de-icer every winter, and that stuff runs off into rivers and lakes and changes aquatic ecosystems. We've got, tire particles going into watersheds and killing coho salmon, en masse in the Puget Sound watershed. And then you've got all of the, sort of the land use change that follows road construction too, right? I mean, if you're gonna log an intact forest or drill for oil and gas or poach an elephant, whatever you're gonna do, the sort of motorized access has to precede it. So, in that sense, it's road building more than any other force that facilitates all of the environmental transformation that that we see around the world. And road ecology, I think, tries to get at those many relationships and interactions.
There's so much to dig into and unpack, but and there obviously are tons of nuances and case studies here. But just starting from the top of the mountain, what is your way of making sense of this and tackling it and understanding that this is a pervasive problem that has come in a very short period of time, really, the last 150 years, 100 years, really. How do you even just get your mind around what seems to be an intractable problem now that we're here in this moment and we've arrived here?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I mean, I think that what I try to do in the book, is sort of tell these different stories of road interactions and relationships through different species, right? I mean, every organism kind of interacts with roads differently, right? On one end of the spectrum, we've got, what scientists would call sort of non-responders, animals that don't really notice traffic, and amphibians are the kind of the classic example of that, right? You get these warm, wet spring nights and, thousands of frogs and salamanders are just kind of on their march, migrating to their breeding ponds to do their thing. And of course, we tend to build roads in low-lying areas where water collects. And so they have to cross roads to get there. And, they're probably not the smartest critters in the world. And so they don't really know what a car is and how dangerous it is. And so they just get crushed, right? In huge numbers. And you get these mass squishing events, as they've been called. So that's, sort of on the non-response end of the spectrum. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got animals like, mountain lions or grizzly bears, these large, wary, intelligent predators, who recognize that humans are trouble and highways are dangerous and, really avoid crossing highways. I mean, yeah, they get hit sometimes, but, more often than not, they're not crossing roads at all. And that leads to its own set of problems, right? In terms of habitat fragmentation and genetic isolation, because these animals can't move around the landscape to find each other and mate, and they end up, very inbred and suffering genetic defects in the case of, mountain lions in Southern California. So, so I think that's how I tried to tackle this book is just thinking about how all of these different critters, whether we're talking about, chum salmon or monarch butterflies or giant anteaters in Brazil or wombats in Australia, all of these critters are kind of interacting with roads differently. And I'm trying to get at those many relationships through stories within the book.
Of all these stories, they're all fascinating, but was there one or two that drew you in more than another, that really surprised you or attracted your attention more than one of the other ones?
And I'll tell you the place that I had the most kind of like profound and memorable reporting experience was in Tasmania in Australia. And Tasmania is the roadkill capital of the world. It has the highest roadkill rates documented on Earth, and the reasons for that are kind of complex, but it's just a combination of high biodiversity, really windy roads without shoulders that go through a lot of relatively intact habitat, and so have very high roadkill rates. And so, it's just this place where like roadkill is incredibly pervasive, and you can't drive. You literally can't drive more than 2 minutes without seeing a dead wombat or wallaby or possum or something. It's just like shocking, and in a way that everybody who goes there notices it. I've talked to so many people since the book came out who said, oh my God, when I was in Tasmania, I just could not look away from all of the roadkill. So it's this really pervasive, kind of unavoidable, omnipresent problem. And the reason that that roadkill is so distinctive in Australia, particularly, is that in Australia there are marsupials, right? And marsupials are these animals where the females, carry their young in this frontal pouch, and so what happens oftentimes is that unfortunately the female marsupial will be killed by a car, but her body is like so big and robust that her baby, her Joey, actually survives in that pouch. And so there are hundreds and hundreds of people all over Tasmania, this relatively small, low populated island, who go around checking the pouches of dead female marsupials and extracting those babies, those joeys within, and then they raise them to adulthood, which entails in some cases years of bottle feeding and butt wiping and antibiotic administration and so on. And it's just this. I just found that so beautiful in a sense. Like here in the U.S., I think that we have this sort of roadkill blindness. We habitually ignore roadkill, and we sort of have to in order to function, right? If if you noticed every single dead songbird or lizard or rodent on the roadside, just that constant violence, I think would make it difficult to go anywhere and do anything. We'd just be so crushed by the weight of all of that death. So I think we blind ourselves to roadkill and ignore it and avoid it. Whereas, in Tasmania, people actually actively seek it out and, and try to provide reparations in a sense by, caring for the animals that are orphaned by roadkill. So just that culture of paying attention to roadkill and caring about it and thinking about it, I thought there was something really profound and kind of wise in that.
Wow. I've never heard that till now, and it is profound. I go around driving a lot now, filming The Turn, my current film.
Yeah.
Going over the pass a lot and heading over to Idaho, and man, I have this sort of baked in habit of crossing myself when I see a roadkill anything, and just my arm's getting tired. I just can't for just sort of an acknowledgement of that creature that was there and is now, physically is gone. And it's a lot. So you're right. There has to be some sort of sense of becoming inured to it so you can function. But it is a lot. And I know making that trip, so many times, we have on I-90 heading east or coming back over here to the west, there is a much, much heralded wildlife crossing that's an overpass now over the top of I-90 right at Lake Cheese. And I love every time going underneath it. It just, there's a sense of some kind of satisfaction, like we're doing something. And of course, I don't get to hang out there. I don't get to really see it. I've seen photographs of, hunter cams of animals going across. But obviously, you don't get to hang out there and see it. It's a good feeling, but what's really happening? What's going on? What have you discovered that's happening out there to address this issue? Obviously, there's many different use cases, as you've pointed out adroitly. But how are we starting to tackle this problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think you put your finger on it, right? Those wildlife crossings, we know those things work really well. And that spot actually up at Snoqualmie Pass, where that overpass is, there actually, I think there's something like 15 or so underpasses around there as well, right? That aren't as conspicuous to a driver, but animals are using those things all the time too, and
Right.
I mean those crossings have been used very widely by deer, elk, black bears, coyotes, mountain lions, you name it. So those things work really well. Obviously you've seen the roadside fences alongside those crossings that kind of guide the animals to those passages. So I mean to me, I think that the scientific research shows pretty clearly, that's like the best tool in our toolbox, right? People talk about lowering speed limits, for example. Well, okay, that sounds good, except how do you get American drivers to drive slower on highways that are meant to be driven at 70 miles an hour, right? It's hard to get people to drive slower. It's just hard to change driver behavior. In a lot of ways, you can reach a small subset of drivers, I think, but the vast majority of people are just getting where they need to get to in this kind of automotive society that we live in. And, I mean, you alluded to all the driving that you do. I mean, I've driven tens of thousands of miles, promoting my book about the ills of driving, right? We're all kind of part of this
Yeah.
system. And so, I think the best thing we can do is, make our infrastructure safer, with wildlife crossings and fences, and where they've been studied in places like Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, they're typically reducing crashes or collisions with animals by more than 90%. They're letting these animal migrations continue. They're often saving the public a lot of money by preventing all of these dangerous, expensive collisions. Hundreds of people die in animal crashes every year, right? So there's this human safety component as well that that these structures help to activate. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that's kind of the best arrow in our quiver, I think, are those wildlife crossings and fences.
Yeah. They just make so much sense. And, we wish that they could have been installed in the first place. Didn't think about it. Folks didn't think about it. You talk about these other harms of highways that extend beyond roadkill. What are some of the things that most folks aren't aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think just because I think we're both fish people, right? I mean, I think about fish a lot, and all of those culverts out there, right? And culvert. I mean, a lot of people don't know what a culvert is, but culverts, any little pipe that's funneling a stream under a road, right? You often see those corrugated metal pipes that are everywhere. There are literally millions of these things in the United States, and every single one of them is potentially a fish passage barrier, right? They constrict the flow of the stream through that little narrow pipe, and they basically create this velocity barrier. It's like you're blasting fish away with a fire hose, essentially, when you just cinch that stream tight. And so it's not like the Elwha dams or something like that, right? It's kind of like death by a thousand cuts. It's just
Right.
There are these much smaller barriers out there that are totally ubiquitous on the landscape and have really dramatically curtailed the places that that salmon and trout and all kinds of other aquatic species can get to, right? So we don't really think about like fish being roadkill, but they're definitely suffering from this this dramatic habitat loss that that roads are creating. And obviously we know that when salmon can complete their life cycle and migrate into the headwaters and spawn, their carcasses are fertilizing forests and feeding bears and eagles. And so, those culverts are, in a sense, just completely curtailing or diminishing the whole function of aquatic ecosystems, right? So, can we replace those culverts with better structures that let streams behave naturally and let fish complete their migrations? I think that's a really big one to me.
Yeah, that's a big topic here, obviously, in the Pacific Northwest. And there's been a fair amount of work and a large amount of money that's gone into that. And you're right, it's death by a thousand cuts. Other things, are there other things that are like non-physical things that we don't think about that are causation from roads being in place as they are?
And I think about road noise pollution a lot, right? And I touched on this a moment ago, but I mean I really feel like road noise pollution is like one of the great unsung public health crises of our time. I mean, there's lots of scientific literature, showing that road noise elevates our cortisol levels and our blood pressures and our risk of, cardiac disease and diabetes and stroke and all of these maladies. I mean, it's literally taking years off of our lives. I mean, there's a study in Paris that basically found that, people living in the quietest neighborhoods lived 3 years longer than people living in the noisiest neighborhoods with all other variables controlled, right? So just this, this mind-blowing health crisis. And yet we're so kind of awash in it, that we don't really even notice it or think about it, right? I wrote a lot of this book while my wife and I were living in Spokane, in Eastern Washington, and we were like a stone's throw from I-90, on this busy arterial road. We had a car going by every 15 or 20 seconds, and below that you could kind of hear the constant monotonous hiss of the interstate. And I had never thought about it, and then I started reading all of this noise pollution scientific literature, and I was like, oh shit, this is like literally killing us. And so when we moved to Colorado, I mean, we made finding a quiet street really a priority, and I think it's dramatically changed our quality of life. But it's doing the exact same thing to all kinds of other critters too, right? I mean, if you're a male songbird, who has to sing to attract a mate, and your mate can't hear you over, engine and tire noise, or if you're an owl who has to listen for the rustle of a mouse's footsteps in the leaf litter, and you can't hear that, you functionally can't live in that place, right? So, a road might only be, let's say, 100 feet wide from shoulder to shoulder, and yet it's creating this acoustic shadow, that's covering, I mean, in some cases, a couple miles.
Yeah. I tell you what, getting older, I notice it incrementally more each year. And it's like to a point where we live on a fairly busy road in Seattle here. And to a point where I physically notice it in my body, and I seek out, I got to get out of here to get to the river, get over to the Snoqualmie River, once a week or as often as I can. And we're working on building a home north of here in Puget Sound. And one of the big things, honestly, top 3 things for me is noise and road noise, that very thing. And I don't know why it's taken me this long to really kind of notice it, but it's a real deal.
Totally, yeah. No, and I know, right? I mean, like you kind of feel like the crotchety old man, shaking your fist at the cloud, saying,
"Oh my
that.
God!"
But I mean, it's really true. It's literally killing us.
I am accepting and owning all of that. Yeah. Any last thoughts on roads, crossings, how road ecology is shaping the future of our planet?
Man, I just think. Yeah, I mean, look, I think about this stuff a lot in the context of climate change too, right?
Right.
The fact that helping animals cross roads safely would be important on any planet, but a planet that's warming up rapidly, it's extra important. We know that animals are going to have to go farther to find resources, and their habitats are changing. Like, I mean, here in Colorado, and I know this is true in Washington as well, obviously, is that we're susceptible to mega fires these days, right? And so if you're an elk, living on the south side of I-70, and 500,000 acres burn up, well, you better get to the north side of I-70, and you need some way of getting across traffic, right?
That's right.
And so the ability to let animals safely navigate the landscape, I think that's just like one of the great challenges of our time when it comes to saving biodiversity.
Well, more crossings.
Right
any
on.
other? Yeah, and any other kind of last thoughts about seeming solutions for this seeming intractable problem at this point?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the things that I really struggled with when I was writing the book was like how radical to be in my prescription, right? I mean, I think
Mm,
it's one of the criticisms that I get sometimes when I give public talks is, somebody will stand up at the end and say, you're not advocating for the end of car culture. You're not being radical enough.
hmm.
And wildlife crossings are just kind of a band-aid on this, this kind of catastrophic automotive society that we have. And I mean there's a lot of truth to that, right? And
Hmm.
I absolutely believe in better walkability and bikeability and pedestrian access and public transit, and all of those things are so important. We need to find a way to reduce the number of cars and the footprint of the personal car in our society. At the same time, I'm also kind of pragmatic or realistic, right? I mean, about the fact that we have all of this infrastructure for cars, and it's not going anywhere, And here in rural Colorado, it's pretty hard to imagine the bus system that's going to replace the automobile, right? When all of our towns are 20 miles apart. So
That's right.
ultimately, I think yes, we need better pedestrianism and transit in urban and suburban areas, but in the rural areas, which happen to be where the wildlife is concentrated, we're kind of stuck with the car, and we need to make it as as non-damaging to nature as possible. So that's the needle I'm trying to thread.
Well said. And Americans, we do love our cars, and good or bad, and seemingly bad, but agreed. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So the ways to mitigate need to be coming on even faster. Halftime. Did you know you could have the world's finest wild salmon shipped directly to your door? It's true. Our Ava's Wild Bristol Bay sockeye salmon is the lowest carbon footprint center plate protein on the planet, and it's packed with heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Don't take our word for it. Ask chefs like Seattle's Tom Douglas and Taichi Kitamura, who are serving our sashimi-grade wild salmon in their award-winning restaurants. You can have the exact same fillets we deliver to them, shipped flash frozen to your door. What's more, Ava's Wild donates 10% of our profits to Indigenous-led efforts to protect Bristol Bay in perpetuity. That's the place we source the salmon from. Right now, that looks like supporting the Bristol Bay Foundation, granting Bristol Bay's Indigenous young people scholarships to four-year colleges, universities, and trade schools. Visit avaswild.com to join our growing community doing good by eating right. That's save, spelled backwards, wild.com. And eat wild to save wild. Now, back to the show. A very different issue, though, that has stemmed from what has been done, damage that has been done over, frankly, human greed and westward expansion and manifest destiny and all these things, was the near extirpation of a small furry critter known as a beaver. And your last book was, and by the way, the title is just supreme in my opinion, simply called Eager.
Yeah,
Surprising.
I take no credit for that. That was my editor's idea. So
Oh, man.
Shout out to Michael.
Michael, well done. I just instantly head turn. Eager, the surprising secret lives of beavers and why they matter. For us salmon nerds here in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, we are deep into beaver workings. People that have read their salmon history know why these little furry critters are important. Very well ingrained into deep salmon nerds, like I said. But for our listeners who wouldn't have a clue about why beavers of all critters could possibly be important, tell us why.
Yeah, right on, man. So what do beavers do? Beavers, of course, build dams, right? And those dams create ponds and wetlands, and beavers are doing that for their own safety and habitat. Beavers are kind of these fat, slow, smelly meat packages who get eaten by wolves and cougars and bears and all kinds of critters, right? So a beaver on land is, in a lot of trouble. But by building that dam, they can kind of, widen the stream and deepen the stream and, create that aquatic habitat where they're safe from predators and can access all of those riparian trees that they're eating. But in the process, all of those beaver ponds and wetlands are providing all of these other ecological benefits as well, right? They're storing water. They're creating thousands of little reservoirs up in the high country that help us mitigate drought and adapt to climate change. They're creating incredible fire breaks. They're filtering out pollution. They're attenuating flash floods in some places, and and they're creating habitat for, every critter under the sun, right? Wood ducks, salamanders, moose, boreal toads, and our friends the salmon. If you're a juvenile salmon or trout, you don't want to live in the fast-moving, free-flowing main stem river. You're just going to get blown downstream and eaten by a kingfisher, right? You want to live in that kind of slow water, deep side channel, eddy, meander, complex refuge habitat, which is exactly what beavers create. And there are a million studies connecting beavers with with fish production, and the inverse. When we lost beavers, because of that westward expansion and colonization and industrial fur trapping that you mentioned, that was this kind of aquatic dust bowl, as some historians have said, and certainly coho salmon and steelhead and other salmonids would have been the primary casualties. So bringing beavers back, whether you're a rancher worried about drought or a steelhead in Western Washington, it's a good call.
It seems like one of those rare pieces. You mentioned a rancher or a steelheader or a commercial fisherman, all kind of having a similar. They can find some common ground here. How did you come to beavers as a topic? Why did they spark your interest? And as we know, anybody that writes a book or creates a film, it's got to keep your topic, your interest for a while. You're on this for some time. How did these guys invade your consciousness?
Dude, I'm still obsessed with them, and the book's been out for years now. I always, growing up, I always loved beavers. I spent a lot of time. I'm from New York originally, and spent a lot of time in the Catskills and the Adirondacks. Very beavery places.
Yeah.
I've got this powerful childhood memory of canoeing with my parents on an Adirondack lake late at night, and just hearing that gunshot of a tail slap, a beaver smacking the water right next to our canoe. That's a sound that I'm sure all of your listeners have heard at some point. And so, I always liked them, thought they were awesome. And then, it was really in, I forget what year this was, but, it was sort of right around that time that I'd started working for High Country News. I was actually living in Seattle at that point and looking for things to cover in Western Washington. And I happened to, receive a flyer for a beaver workshop that was going on up in Everett, and I was like, "Well, awesome. I don't know what that entails, but that sounds like that could be a story." And it was just one scientist after another, saying their piece about why beavers were so important for all of those different ecosystem services I was talking about earlier, especially salmon production, and in Western Washington, that's such a big part of why beaver restoration has become so hot in the Northwest, is that salmon connection. So I was like, wow, these animals aren't just cute, furry, interesting, fun rodents. They're really one of the kind of the primary architects of our continent, and one of the best ecological solutions we have for all of these different crises. And so it was that beaver workshop that just got me fired up and resulted in a couple of High Country News articles, and eventually that turned into the book. And here I am. The book came out in 2018, and there's still new exciting beaver stuff to write about. Last summer I went up to Nome, Alaska, up into the subarctic, and beavers are expanding their range onto the tundra with climate change as that willow line, moves north. So, I got to do a week of Arctic beaver reporting, which is really just a grayling fishing trip disguised as a reporting trip. But it was sweet up there, man. So yeah, there's still a huge part of my life.
Shh, you're not supposed to divulge our secrets.
Oh, right. Sorry, yeah.
Our secrets here.
Don't tell anybody.
Our fishing secrets. The architects of our continent. I'm going to steal that. That's amazing. the Elwha, I was just out there filming recently with for the turn, and as mentioned, and ran into our mutual friend Ann Schaefer, and we were talking about you and your book and beavers, and there was a beaver at one of the side channel, a pond actually there, right adjacent to the mouth of the Elwha, and sadly he's not there right now, and we think that it was a dog that might have got him. Careful with your dogs, folks. But can you? I think it's a great visual way to maybe explain. Everybody around these parts anyway is somewhat familiar or has at least heard of the Elwha dam removal. And can you maybe paint us a picture of why beavers might be integral into the rehabilitation of that system back into a completely functioning, thriving system?
Yeah, so I'm just paraphrasing Anne here, and you should have her on as a guest if you haven't already.
She's coming.
All right, awesome. But my understanding, of course, is that when those two dams came out, right? Yes, the river was liberated, but also all of that sediment was liberated too, right? I mean that's what in some ways that's what rivers are. They're conveyors of sediment as much as water. I think maybe it was Luna Leopold, who's Aldo's son and a great geomorphologist, described rivers as like the gutters down which flow the ruins of continents or something like that. Wow. I forget the exact phrase, but something along. I'm paraphrasing. But that idea that rivers are just moving a huge amount of sediment, of course.
True.
And once those dams are gone, they can return to doing that. And all of that sediment builds up, at that delta, where the Elwha meets the Pacific.
Yep.
And as that sediment returns, all of those old side channels and that kind of habitat complexity comes back, and all of a sudden there are places for willow and alder to take root, and suddenly there's all of this fantastic kind of off-channel beaver habitat popping back up. Beavers in Washington they're much more coastal than people realize. I think that's one of those ecological connections or functions that was destroyed when we wiped out beavers, was their role in these coastal systems. I mean, there's been some really cool research in the Puget Sound watershed basically showing that beavers will actually build dams in these intertidal marshes, right? So the tide comes in and the dam is completely submerged, and you could kayak over it and never know it was there. Then the tide goes out and that dam is suddenly holding this little bathtub of water, the brackish water that ends up being really good, juvenile salmon rearing habitat, it turns out. So, beavers have this cool kind of intertidal life history that they're capable of engaging in, and they're doing that to some extent in the Elwha again. So that's yet another kind of ecological connection, along with, of course, salmon migration that was revived when those dams came out.
Once again, with this book, maybe what was the most interesting or magnetic piece that you didn't know before? That drew you in and you now can't let go of?
That's a really good question. I mean, I just think so much about how different this continent was with beavers on it, right? I think that's it's like being beaver pilled. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The fact that you're beaver pilled, man. The fact that like Lewis and Clark, Lewis and Clark described going up the Missouri River and seeing beaver dams wall to wall and every single tributary, as far as the eye can see up to the base of the mountains. Like you've got explorers who were crossing what is today Indiana and couldn't find a dry place to camp for 100 miles because beavers had ponded everything up. Trappers going through places that we consider desert today, in southeastern Wyoming or northern Utah, and finding these lush marshes full of waterfowl. The fact that this continent, and Europe too, was once just a much greener, bluer, wetter, lusher place, especially the American West, which of course we think of as being, fundamentally water limited and drought stressed today. I can't let go of that. The fact that a fully beavered continent with several 100 million of these animals, as there probably were, it's just such a fundamentally different place than the landscape that exists today.
Amazing. It's such a great, great topic for a book. I'm so glad you wrote it. And we're going to be coming back to it time and again, I think, on not only through this show, but when we go on tour with the film. It's just such a critical part of salmon infrastructure here on the West Coast. Thank you for writing it. I know you are a friend of Bristol Bay. I know you've been to Bristol Bay, and it's in your mind and it's in your heart. In fact, I see over your shoulder there for our YouTube watchers, they can see that beautiful ray troll print for you listeners.
That's right.
Yes, Ben has a beautiful ray troll print. I think it's the
Fishes of the Salish Sea.
Fishes of the Salish Sea. There it is.
Yep.
My very first piece of art that I ever purchased was Midnight Run by Ray Troll, with the salmon jumping over sort of the Japanese forms of the river, of the waterfall. And I bought it in the museum and in Dillingham when I was 19 years old, working in the canneries. And
nice, awesome.
Yes, and that was my first interaction with Alaska, certainly with Bristol Bay, with Ray Troll, who's a dear friend now, and I bought into everything. I bought into the whole thing. I'm like, I want this, and I want all of it. I want more for the rest of my life. In fact, I'm wearing a Ray Troll shirt as we speak.
I should have worn. I've got that great salmon tree of life shirt.
There you go.
I should have worn my matching Ray Troll shirt. I didn't know we were doing that, but
I know. Well,
I missed out.
We'll do it next time. We'll do it next time. Did you know there is a tree of life animation out there in the world right now?
I don't think so. I did.
I'll send it to you.
Please,
it's outstanding. P.S. His son, Patrick Troll, is a friend, and we've been working together for years in a filmmaking. He's an editor capacity. He's also a great musician, part of the Ratfish Wranglers. Right on. He has a full Ray Troll biopic coming out. I'm a producer on it. And
no way. Cool.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Feature documentary about the maestro himself. So
I can't wait. Awesome.
Yes. But back to Bristol Bay.
Yeah.
How did you come to Bristol Bay, or how did it come to you, into your heart? And what do you see the way forward looking like for this singular place on the planet, for salmon and for people who've been there for thousands of years? And by the way, beavers, lots of them there.
Yeah. Man, good question. I mean, I think so. I've done a bunch of work with WWF over the years in various capacities. I did some kind of communications work, and I wrote for their magazine. And they've been I don't know if you ever come across Dave Applin, but he's their
Absolutely.
guy. Yeah, of course. He's sort of Alaska legend. So he's down in Homer, and so I spent a summer in Homer working with Dave on Bristol Bay communications, both sort of fighting oil and gas leasing in Bristol Bay, and also, of course, Pebble. And so Dave, in his infinite wisdom and generosity, sent me out there for a few weeks to Dillingham and Knack, hanging out with all kinds of set netters and other getting out on boats, and of course talking to lots of pick folks, just trying to sort of understand all of the ways that people relate to and experience that place, and I did some sort of ghost writing of op-eds for various commercial fishing publications, working with fishermen there, and taking pictures and putting together various sort of media packages around that place. And then Dave and I went back a couple years later with a videographer and a photographer for a story for World Wildlife magazine about Bristol Bay, and we got to all of the just the special places up there, riding little bush planes around all of those many communities that I can't say I know super well, but have now spent cumulatively, let's say, a month out there or so. And it's just, it's just an incredible, miraculous place. And, I think that, look, one of the things that of course is so special about it is, it was always, one of the great sort of biological spectacles and surges of biomass on Earth. But, it's also this amazing window, I think, into what so many systems looked like to some extent, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's like that could have been the Columbia or the Klamath or, all of these rivers, whose salmon runs, we've degraded and lost, or the Central Valley, and so. I think in some ways, Bristol Bay it just shows us, the kind of spectacular biological abundance and like almost like the generosity of these fish, in giving their bodies and their lives to back to the system, and it provides this benchmark that we can shoot for when projects like the Klamath Dam removals happen. It's just this incredible example, I think, of what nature's capable of.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That generosity of salmon, I come back to it again and again, and it's why I stay doing the work. It's that North Star of that generosity, whether they know it or not. It doesn't matter. It is a physical act of love. And I guess when I'm looking at asking you to look forward, you may have noticed that we're going to have a distinct new incoming presidential administration. In this nascent moment of its formation, how are you getting your mind around what this will mean for your work and the critical environmental work that needs to be done right now, including places like Bristol Bay?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't want to speak too much to Bristol Bay specifically because I know that so many of your listeners know it so much better than I do, and follow every sort of turn of the political screw there. I mean, I'll say obviously the fact that Don Jr. Has spent a lot of time fishing up there, and obviously last time during the last Trump administration supported its protection. I mean, that seems like potentially a good sign. I think broadly. Look, one of the things I go back to is when I signed the contract to write Eager, my book about beavers, back in 2016, and I just happened to sign that contract and start that process the week before Trump was elected the first time. And at the time, I sort of thought, like, man, what, I can't believe I'm doing this. I just signed up to spend the next couple of years writing a book about beavers, of all of the ridiculous, frivolous things, when I should be spending the next 2 years filing information requests for Trump's Interior Department or whatever. I should be watchdogging this administration. But it ended up being this incredible gift in so many ways, right? In part because beavers are this issue that in some ways is just so hyper local that it doesn't really interact much with the federal government, right? I mean, yes, the Forest Service and the BLM have some role to play in beaver restoration, but so much of bringing beavers back comes down to the actions of private landowners, of county commissions who manage public roads and kill beavers when they flood roads and shouldn't, town councils, there are all of these hyper local levels of government, and again, private landowners, who really control the fate of these animals. And so, here's this incredible ecological solution, that doesn't actually require a whole lot of help from the federal government, which was a good thing because, of course, we didn't get any help, those 4 years. And so, that's one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is like, okay, what are the issues, the places, the people, who are kind of operating at local levels below, the level of the federal government, who can continue their work, over the next 4 years relatively uninterrupted, and how can I help facilitate that work and shine a light on those local efforts? I think that's how I'm, conceiving of my role right now.
It's such a great answer, man. I've been talking about hyper local for the last several days as well.
Awesome.
Slight derivative of that, and we're gonna wrap this up for today. But we are, undeniably in the most partisan, tribal, with a lowercase t, fractured time, I think, besides the Civil War in our country. And you're living in Colorado. There's plenty of red and blue folks and communities, just like the rest of America in Colorado. How do you see, just as a person from where you're sitting, what do you see as ways to get us all to the same table? We are made of the exact same genetic stuff. We all want to come home to our families at night. We all want to be able to provide for our families. We all want to, I think, all want to be able to enjoy the beauty and the grandeur of nature. What are some of the ways that you think we might be able to find our way back to a table where we can have these conversations?
Yeah, it's such a good question, man. Look, I do think that, that's one of the beautiful things about wildlife, right? Is that, there is this kind of shared set of values around wildlife. And look, I don't want to say that that's true of all species. Obviously, wolves were introduced to Colorado last winter, and here's this hyper polarizing animal that has really divided the state in so many ways. So it's not like wildlife is some magical kumbaya thing, but on some level, I think that's one of the things that attracted me to a book about roads and wildlife is because the topic of wildlife vehicle collision prevention and avoidance. That's totally nonpartisan, right? When you look at the groups that in states like Colorado and Utah and Wyoming have supported building wildlife overpasses for deer and elk and pronghorn. It's often the hunting lobby, who don't want to see animals splattered on the highway any more than anybody else does, right? That truly is this kind of nonpartisan issue in this hyper partisan world. In Colorado, there's just a public opinion poll that found that 85% of Coloradans support more wildlife crossings. And you would see the same stats in Nevada or Oregon or any Western state. So I think that's another thing I'm thinking about a lot as well, is trying to highlight those hyper local issues around which we can sort of generate progress at a time when the federal government is likely to be hostile to conservation. But can we also find these kinds of nonpartisan wildlife issues, like wildlife crossings, that we can convene people around? And and that was the case during the last Trump administration too. The only good thing that Ryan Zinke, his interior secretary, ever did, was sign a secretarial order basically directing Western states to protect large ungulate migrations, which was awesome, and a good sign of progress. Some of the text around federal funding for wildlife crossings was written by John Barrasso, Republican senator from Wyoming. So here's this relatively nonpartisan issue, and can wildlife be this convener of people and values, and in a state like Colorado, maybe it can.
Brilliant. I'm so grateful for your time. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and you do not escape, though, the bonus round here that everybody gets, which is a very simple little thought exercise. In these times of climate change that we're in, these things are not as fantastical as I originally had intended them as a bonus question, but we're just pretending now. It's not going to happen. I'm knocking on wood here. But let's just say fire came to your neck of the woods, and you only had a little bit of time. You get your critters out, you get your loved ones out, all the physical people and things that we love. But if there's only one physical thing beyond an organic human or an animal that you could take with you, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one which my wife and I have discussed, and we have come to a consensus answer, which is that for our wedding 8 years ago, we had a friend who was he was living up in Barrow, Alaska, studying sea ice, and he bought for us for our wedding a strip of bowhead whale baleen. Off of a native hunter who had killed that whale, and he gave us for our wedding a strip of baleen that now hangs on our wall. So that's the most sacred object in our house, and that's what we're saving for sure.
Ding ding! That has not been answered in that way ever. Wonderful answer.
What's your answer?
I got a tub of journals. Yeah, cool. Since I was 16 years old, and like anybody's going to want to read that crap, but it's my sacred thing. There is one part that I'm going to follow up with here, though. If it's a metaphysical thing about you, one thing that makes Ben, what would that thing be? What trait would you take?
Oh man, geez, that's a good question. Look, Mark, I try to avoid introspection whenever possible. I think that's maybe why I'm a journalist, not a memoirist. Um, I mean, look, I think it's like the whole man. I think it's like the whole Ed Abbey, reluctant crusader. That famous line, right? That the reason that we care about this stuff and work to save it is because we just love being in it.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of like yeah, that I mean, I'd like to imagine that's something that kind of suffuses, I think, a lot of my writing is just, this love and passion for wildlife, for fish, for landscape. And I hope that's what makes my work fun to read is that, not only that I like to imagine that I understand, these systems and critters, but also that I'm genuinely passionate about them and have a deep abiding love for them. So I don't know, maybe that's my answer, but I don't often consider myself metaphysically, Mark. I really try to avoid that whenever possible.
I'm hearing passion, but I'll also mark down some genuine humility because that's what I'm hearing too. It's been a pleasure, Ben Goldfarb, the author of Eager: The Surprising Secret Lives of Beavers and Why They Matter, and Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet. Ben, how can folks follow along with what you're doing and get these important books?
Yeah, the books are available wherever books are sold. So, ask your local bookstore to stock them if they don't already. I love supporting independent bookstores, as I bet most of your listeners do.
Yep.
And my website is bengoldfarb.com, where you can read more of my articles as well. And yeah, Mark, it was a pleasure, man. Come down to Colorado. We'll get you up into some of the high lakes around here. We'll catch some native cutthroat. It's gonna be awesome, dude.
Brilliant. Oh,
Come on
man.
down.
I I'm there, and likewise, invitation is extended to come out here and visit the Skagit with me, or out on the Olympic Peninsula. We'll go chase after some steelhead.
That'd be so cool. Yeah, that's a fish that I have spent hours pursuing totally unsuccessfully. So I'll put myself in your hands.
Well, I don't know if they're good hands to be put into because I have had the exact same experience. I'm in love with them. I can't get them out of my mind or out of my body. But despite being a guide in Alaska, and I caught some on some gear back in the day, I have yet to land a steelhead on a fly. So we could pursue those together. But we'll do that for another day. Ben Goldfarb, thank you for your time, and we'll see you down the trail.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, brother.
How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love?
Thank you for listening to Save What You Love. If you like what you're hearing, you can help keep these conversations coming your way by giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening from and leaving a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. Check out photos on our Instagram feed. We're at Save What You Love Podcast, and you can get links from today's featured guest in the show notes of this episode. Join our growing community by subscribing to our newsletter at avaswild.com and then clicking on Connect in the upper corner. You'll get exclusive offers on wild salmon shipped to your door and notifications about upcoming guests and more great content on the way. That's at avaswild.com, the word save spelled backwards, wild.com. This episode was produced by Emily Fern and edited by Patrick Troll. Original music was created by Whiskey Class. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all down the trail.